Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Hoop Dreams, which is a very, very well-known 1994 documentary that ever since I heard about it, I've been very keen to see it. I think it's because I first heard that Roger Ebert had called it one of the greatest American documentaries, and it's just, you know, that there was a real effusive level of praise for this film, and it's just come up on Mubi, so we watched it, and I've got to tell you, I was captivated, and by the end I was blown away. I thought this is one of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen.
Okay, so tell me what you liked about it.
So what it is, it's about two young black American kids, boys, live in Chicago, and they both have dreams of making it to the NBA. And they come from they don't know each other, at least at the start. They come from two separate, underprivileged, poor black neighbourhoods in Chicago, and then a talent scout spots them playing basketball, you know, with their friends on playground, and takes them to an upmarket school, St. Joseph High School in Westchester, which is suburban, it's privileged, and there's all this talk at the start. The two kids are saying, you know, this is not going to be like the schools I go to. There's going to be white kids there. There aren't white kids at my school. The facilities are much higher standard, all that kind of stuff. It's a private school as well. And the film follows them for about 5 years as they are trained and eventually applied to colleges. And all the meanwhile, they're kind of balancing work and school, they're balancing work, school life, being coached and trying to make it to professional level basketball. And it's this amazing portrait of life in America. You know, we've talked before about State of the Nation films, and this is 25 years old, but it has the feel of, at the time, and it has so much relevance today, this is a State of the Nation film for America. And what I really loved about it was that it is so complex, but it never nods at anything. It doesn't wink at you. It doesn't say, oh, you should notice this, you should notice this, about kind of race relations, about class relations. It just pictures it, observes it, and lets you notice what you want to notice and draw the connections you want to draw. And I think it's got a masterfully light touch.
Okay, light touch is not the way that I would have put it. Okay. But I agree with you about everything else. It's a portrait of America then, it's a portrait of America now. It actually makes what's happening now in Minneapolis like completely understandable. You see in the film, you know, all the structural problems with America, the poverty, the class, the race. You know, there's a beautiful moment where, you know, Arthur's family goes through the University of Illinois. And they're walking on campus, and the mother says, my God, this is like another world. And the child says, this is beyond another world. And all it is a university campus, right? Like, you're not on the moon, You're not on Mars, right? But, you know, I thought it was a very revelatory moment of these huge discrepancies. I found the film really heartbreaking because, you know, especially the character of Arthur, you see this kind of boy, right? I think when the film starts, he's probably 13 or something. He looks like a young boy, right?
I think they're about 14, 15 when it begins.
Okay.
That was my sense.
But Arthur looks younger, at the beginning of the film. And kind of, you know, and he's in a loving family. That's the other thing, you know, that I think is important to underline, right? So their families love them. And certainly you see the mother's sacrifice incredibly for them. But on the other hand, you know, these are kids who have to deal with poverty, with drugs. I actually thought that some of the scenes at the beginning of the film in the basketball court, you know, they are the visual vocabulary of The Wire. This is where it's from. Yeah, kind of. You know, the drug dealers on the estate in the corners, kind of, you know, and again, this is almost like kind of seemingly peripheral to the story as you're watching it, but absolutely central to it, kind of as it unfolds, right? So here's a young, kind of vulnerable, shy boy, really. You know, initially it seems with a loving family, and then, you're told that the family breaks up, that the father has been hitting on the mother, that he's hooked on drugs, that he's been to jail, that the mother has had to make do with no money from the social for 3 months, so their electricity is cut off, their gas is cut off, right? So, this child learning to be a ball player with all of the families and the community's hopes and dreams kind of placed on these very frail little shoulders, right? Has to attempt to do that whilst all of the rest of this stuff is going on in his life. And actually, all of the rest of this stuff, one of the things that moved me and makes me angry, really, is that you have these slogans. Oh, it's almost like, fucking Auschwitz. It reminds me of Auschwitz, right? Like, work will set you free. So, in the high school, they have something like that, work hard and whatever, right? So you have all of these slogans, which places all the responsibility on these poor young boys, whereas actually the problems are systemic and structural, and kind of, there might be a miracle and you might kind of, get out of them, really, but all the odds are stacked against you, really. Yeah. And you see that everywhere.
Yeah, the character of, I say character, he's a real bloke, but the coach at St. Joseph's is a fascinating character, and particularly his relationship with William is fascinating to me, because William is the character. I want to stop saying character because these are real people. William is the young lad, the boy whose story I found the more tragic, and his ends the more tragically. He's the one who kind of loses love, falls out of love with basketball because of what he's been through at the school and the way he's been treated, and particularly his relationship with the coach, who is a real kind of hard ass. And he has he's a real Catholic. Like, at the end, he says you should have enjoyed the punishment. When I made you run 50 laps or whatever. That's such a Catholic,
I
the
hated
punishment.
him.
Yeah, he's awful. and he doesn't really see... There are so many scenes or so many interactions, and particularly that one at the end where they're kind of saying goodbye, where what they're saying is indicative of what they're not saying to each other. He basically says, have you enjoyed your time at the school here? Because he's graduating. Have you enjoyed your time at the school? Don't say anything that you don't believe. And he says, yeah, I've enjoyed it for the last 4 years. And it's just the complete opposite is true. And it's all about what they're not saying.
I think it's communicated very well because, there's this passive thing where William is smiling, but he's not answering, right? Or or he say, well, kind of, I'm going to go into communications to learn how to reject the letter of funding that you're going to send me, or the fundraiser that you're going to send me. That there's a clear dislike, actually.
Yeah. It's so heartbreaking that, at some points you kind of want them to stand up and exclaim about the kind of the unfair treatment that they're getting, and it so much of it makes me think that I think some of it is very specific to America in terms of the school system and the way that school and sports are intertwined, and exactly, it's all about money.
Money is the issue, and
your scholarship is based on if you're good at basketball. That's how these kids get into these schools, and of course it's what it's what they're relying on, and the parents are so devoted to this, and they so need the kid to be successful at basketball, to keep the scholarship and to get into a university and so on and so forth, which is something that's only got worse and worse, especially with, if you look at what the NCAA does now, which is the National Collegiate Athletics Association. I think college sports, particularly basketball and American football these days, there's so much money involved, and there are so many it's bizarre to me that, like, the biggest stadium, you get like 100,000 seater stadiums for college sports in the States, not professional sports, and you have kind of video games about them, video game endorsements, that these kids are put on the cover of video games and they don't get any money for it. And this is the kind of crucial thing, because the NCAA has caps on how much they can get paid. They say, well, we're providing an education, and it's just bollocks. The education is not there to help them. The education is in things like Swahili, and they're there to make people money in the most crude, disgusting way. And actually, there's one point in this film where Spike Lee's speaking to the kids, and he's supposed to be giving. He's been invited to this school to give them a kind of pep talk, and what he tells them is, "You're going to go and make white people money," basically. Yeah. Which is kind of wonderfully bracing. I wish I'd stayed with it longer because it's about 5 seconds and then he goes.
Yeah, it's a brilliant moment. But actually, I think, one of the things that's so interesting between the relationship between William and the coach is that as soon as he has the accident and his knee goes, right, you see, first of all, the coach is completely uninterested in him or his feelings or even his bloody knee. All he's interested in is in winning the championship, right? Because presumably winning the championship is, good for his own career. So he pushes the kid to get back into the game way too early. So he basically ruins his career. Again, the filmmakers don't tell you this. They don't go into a close-up or anything, right? But it's just that passive-aggressive dialogue of, oh, it's your decision. You have to make your own decision, right? But if you don't play now, you can't play until next year. Yeah, so you can really see the coach manipulating the kid into playing too early, right? Which ends up resulting in him losing what made him great to begin with. And actually, because he loses that, he loses the coach's affection and concern. I mean, he's just a thing to the coach, right? And that thingness is actually so revealing of, American capitalism in general, but actually also race relations, right?
Yeah, well, there are points in the film where I was really reminded, and this is what I'm saying when I use the phrase light touch, and I think it is, I can understand it's not light subject material, but I think it's handled with a light touch because it never presses these points, it never narrates them, it never says, oh, you should be noticing this here. Do you see what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I know what you're saying. I just think light touch is the wrong term. I mean, the film allows you to discover these things. It doesn't coerce you into discovering, yeah?
Yeah, okay, so we understand each other.
Yeah, we understand each other, but kind of light touch for me indicates, that it's kind of playful and superficial. And it's not, really. It's kind of, it's just a film that allows you the freedom to discover things on your own. It has very little voiceover, and when it appears at interesting moments, yeah? So it's... Yeah, that's right. So it does. The voiceover doesn't tell you what to think about the things that you're watching. It just kind of gives you information.
Yeah, and you're talking about kind of William's knee and his body there, and how the kind of failure of his body makes the coach lose interest in him, makes him lose all his value. Really made me think of like slave auctions.
Yes.
And there's also a moment where actually there are scouts from different schools and colleges observing kids kind of essentially being paraded around, and they make judgments on their bodies. He's got a good body, he already looks like a pro, that sort of thing. Yeah. And it's not excessively racial in the fact that there are white kids there as well who are being judged in the same way, but obviously basketball is predominantly African American, and all of the scouts that you see are white and kind of representing these big institutions, so it definitely has that feeling. And it also made me think of like in football, which is the sport I'm most familiar with, soccer for any Americans who might be listening, when a new black player, a young black player who's very good emerges, they're always compared to another black player. So like when Anthony Martial, who's a French guy who plays for Man United now, when he emerged, he was compared to Thierry Henry, who is a great French black winger. And, Romelu Lukaku, who's a huge, muscly black forward, he was compared to Didier Drogba, who again has similar properties. And that almost never happens with white players or South American players. I mean, maybe Messi was the new Maradona, but that's about it. It always happens with black players. And it's a valuing of the physicality of their body that kind of means that we feel like we're allowed to say that. He has the same body as him, and we remove anything else about them, which we wouldn't really dream of doing with white people.
The film demonstrates how the only people with power are white.
Yeah.
So, like in the poor high school, the counselors can help, they can advise, Yeah, they're constantly reminding, bring me those papers or whatever, but actually they can't do anything for them, right? So, the people who can get them summer jobs, who can get them scholarships, who can scout them, yeah, they're all white. So you have kind of, this enormous kind of structural kind of discrepancy that the film just allows you to see, really, and which kind of demarcates. So you have these families who are, on the one hand, inadvertently creating problems for the children, putting way too many expectations on them, but also kind of offering them love and support, right? One of the things that I felt kind of very sad and sorry, and I wish that they'd made another film, was Arthur's father, because
Yes.
kind of, you think, what drove that man to drugs, right? Because as the film begins, he's kind of, it feels like a stable family, and he seems really sweet, the father, and nice, right? And you think kind of, what happened, that he ends up in drugs and in jail, and so a lot of that is obviously structural. I think he loses his job, in the middle of all of this.
It was very early on. He says he's lost various jobs. He can't,
Yeah.
can't seem to kind of hold one down.
So, but nonetheless, he's creating problems for his child, and his child resents him, kind of, and doesn't believe him, and typical kind of druggy thing, where he might be very well meaning. You get the feeling that he definitely believes what he says, but they've failed you too many times. You don't believe what they're going to say. You'll probably get high and not show up to your game or whatever again, right? So the film allows you to see all of this, all of these kind of complex relationships amongst people, and all done through a kind of, this is something you pointed out earlier, through a kind of not speaking, right? It's all observational. It's all through the body language of the kid, or how he looks away when his father tells him how much he loves him. I mean, there's a little bit of eye rolling in the moment I'm thinking about, but actually for most of the film, there's not even that. There's just kind of this looking away, or this looking down, or this not answering, right? So kind of all of these dynamics are kind of conveyed through these spaces of interaction.
All of those moments are really beautifully chosen, I think. And I think it's interesting to note that the film was, amongst its many awards, it was also nominated for the Academy Award for Best Editing. Yeah. And you can feel that because not only is it in individual cuts, where occasionally there's that one jump cut, or I suppose it's a match cut, between the kind of white college bus and the black school bus, and the one is calm and no one's talking, and then on the black bus it's boisterous and there's movements and so on, and you just get this immediate sense of the two different worlds. But also it's in the selection of moments. It's a 3-hour long film, but it's a film that was built out of something like 250 hours of footage. And there's so many ways you can imagine of telling this story, or these stories, and the moments that they choose are the ones that ask further questions about what's going on, or ask to be interpreted. And that's why I think it's beautifully kind of narrated in that way, because what I really love about the way it's told is that fundamentally it is never not about these two kids. That's what it's always about. It's about these kids and who they are and who their families are and what their lives are and what their aspirations are. And it's always about them and how they are reacting to what's around them and so on. And everything else that you can then read into it or take out of it is important and it's contextual, but it's all surrounding material, It's never the focus to say this, this and this.
It's not the focus, but it contributes to the focus. So, for example, the film makes me very angry, really, because the structural oppression is so vivid and real and unfair and unjust. I mean, for one high school to prevent a child from graduating, yes, because there's a bill to be paid and they won't release the grades until the bill is paid, and and so on. And I mean, it's just outrageous. It's kind of, I find it astonishing. I mean, it's not the kid's fault, right? So why should a child's future be compromised because of something like that he had nothing to do with, in a way, right? But then also you see the conditions of the schools and you think, like, fuck America, right? Kind of, how ground down is, like, this system that these kids have to learn in an environment like that. I mean, when the English teacher says, well, we have to mix 5, 6, 7, 8 grades here because we just don't have the money to give any more English classes. I mean, that's its own kind of structural oppression, right? Kind of, you know, black schools in black neighborhoods kind of can't afford the teachers and the classes and so on. I mean, you know, even though it was also interesting because a lot of those teachers were white as well, right? So, you know, the structural kind of, you know, systems of oppression are just kind of so outrageous and unfair and unjust. And I mean, again, just to relate it to the news now, kind of, you know, you so understand where all of this is coming from, right? You know, all of these years of all of that, when the child says, you know, that, I mean, he's trying to play basketball and he has to go home and kind of be accosted at gunpoint, right? And then you realize that, you know, the mother, it happened to the mother as well, and it happened to the father, and you know, and if you read the wiki page, which I did just before we talked, you know, to try to remember the names, you know, one of the brothers was shot, right? Yeah, kind of. It's like this thing of, you know, Black Lives Matter. Well, they don't, right? I mean, you know, and kind of, you know, in the film, in a way, you know, what it shows you is the struggle to survive. So you come out with really good feelings about so many things. The sense of community, the mother struggles, you know, the love that you see in the film, you know, but then you also see kind of, you know, all that's stacked against them. And it's really, it's both kind of moving and it makes you angry. Yeah.
One of the things I also found most moving, was the individual pressure that was put on each of these kids. So it's not just the pressures you mentioned of the communities around them and their families, and kind of the hopes of a community are based on this kid could be good enough to make it to the pros. Yeah, there's that, but there's also the pressure of what they actually have to do at school.
Yeah.
You know, what, like, it, I mean, you're thinking these kids are 15, 16, 17 years old and they're working harder. They've got a full they've got a workload at school. They've got to keep their grades up. They've also got to work hard to get into the team, and that's where, you know, their kind of hopes for the future lie. These kids can't afford lives even. There's talk of one friend that one of the kids has outside of school. That's it. Like, these kids live at school. They are... The amount of pressure being put on a 16-year-old kid for the future. Like, every kid, even... You know, when I was 16, you know, there was pressure about, you got to get the grades because otherwise you won't get into a good university. And if you don't get into a good university, you'll have a shit future, and so on and so forth. Every kid is kind of told that. But these kids are really living it in a way that most kids don't. And the kind of psychological toll that has to take on you long term is hideous. It made me feel so awful for them.
I thought, you know, being in a basketball team or a team of any kind, a sports team of any kind, is my worst nightmare. You know, so I thought, you know, there's so many good things about being in a team, about playing in a team, right? You know, that sense of like kind of belonging to a team and being supportive of a team and being one of a group, yeah, that everybody has to do their bit in order to achieve something. That's the ideal view of sport, right? And actually, I think there's a book called something like what football teaches you about life or something like that goes on.
Yeah, I think I gave you that book.
Okay.
Oh no, you bought me that book. In fact, it was a philosophy book you bought at the Tate, I think.
So, but what this shows you is almost like the opposite. You know, it's the bullying and, you know, the being coerced into things and the being manipulated into things. And actually what you end up seeing is, for, you know, the coaches on one side, but also the family on the other, what they do or what they have done is they rob these children of their childhoods, you know. So like, it's constantly telling them, oh, you know, these are your decisions, you got to make your decision. Yeah, but basically, if you don't make this decision, the family will starve or something, right? Yeah. You know, that bit where the father says, you know, we'll go into hock for you. And he looks like, what? Like, what? Yeah, you don't even have the means of getting into hock, right?
Yeah. And also the film has a way of picking out moments that are this moment could change everything. And there are moments in games where, like in the playoffs at the end of the season, for instance, if with 5 seconds to go, if William can make the shot, then the game carries on, or they win and they get to go through, and he misses the shot, and it's this thing of it's over. And maybe the film is overdoing it at that point. You don't really know, but it could definitely communicate the kind of feeling of, if one thing goes wrong at this point in your life, every domino falls.
Yes.
And you won't have a future.
Yes.
And again, that kind of communicates the pressure these kids are under. Although I did then find it, maybe this is why I found it kind of so elating, when Arthur's team, towards the end of the film, starts doing really well, and they're underdogs in the state championships, and they start beating much bigger teams. And, for you go, finally, there's some joy in these kids' lives, even if it's just one of them. I think it's also interesting that obviously they're following these kids' lives as they happen. So you can't say, like, you can't make a plot straight away because you're following real life. But even though the kids start off in quite similar positions, they're not identical. And William, it seems early on, at least to me, was starting off in a slightly better position, particularly when the woman from, I think, Encyclopedia Britannica announced that she and her husband were going to personally pay for his tuition, so he didn't have to worry about paying for his schooling, whereas Arthur doesn't have that assurance. And Arthur ultimately, I can't remember if he's kicked out or he drops out, or is he the one, is it Arthur who leaves because he can't afford the $1,800 for the transcript?
That's right.
And so he ends up going to a public school again.
Let's elaborate on that, because actually that is that is crucially important to the film. So you have two kids, and they're both from similar poor neighborhoods, so different neighborhoods. One of them has a full scholarship to this private school, right? The other one thinks he has a private scholarship, but the family hasn't read the fine print, right? And actually the scholarship only covers X amount. So when, at the end of the first semester or second semester, the family can't pay the money owed, the kid is kicked out. And there's an argument about that, because they say, well, had the kid been good enough at basketball, they would have paid. There wouldn't have been a problem with the scholarship. So there's also a commentary, basically, that, because he's not good enough, he's got to pay the tuition. And then all of a sudden, this has terrible consequences for him and his family, because he loses a semester of high school. The family all of a sudden becomes in debt, and they're all on minimum wage jobs, etc. So the film unfolds from, that basic and important difference that one kid is going to private school, the other one is going to an inner city school, and they're both playing basketball, but in completely different leagues, so to speak.
Yeah. But what I kind of expected, I suppose, was that this would then follow a trajectory of William, being the kid who has the scholarship, is on an upward trajectory, and things are going to go well for him. And Arthur, things are going to go much worse for him. He won't be able to afford things, will drop out, and so on and so forth. And to an extent, that's what happens. But actually, kind of life is much more complicated. I mean, because it's not like saying this kid's life will be easy and this one's will be hard. You kind of go, no, they're both going to be hard, but one will be harder than the other for these reasons. But by the time you get to the end of the film, it's not exactly that they've switched, but William is the one who has completely fallen out of love with the game, whereas Arthur is still harbouring hopes of getting to the NBA. And he's the one who's won those championships with the kind of lower ranked team of the public school.
For me, one of the things that is so damning in the film, and I think this is where the name comes in. It's Hoop Dreams, but what you really see is a whole community, really, and it's a real dead end community. It's people who haven't got a chance. When the mother says, oh, to live to be 18 on his 18th birthday, like, isn't that fabulous? The expectation is that most kids from those places don't make it to 18. Yeah, they get killed, or, they have problems with drugs. And actually, all the things that you see around it are an indication of, like, the structural unfairness of the whole thing. So, these people have no jobs, or they get a job in Pizza Hut for $3 an hour, right? I mean, it's just like they have no possibilities. So what the film is telling you is that basically you need a miracle. You need to be one of the very best players in America to even have a chance at kind of a life, as a black person, right? Like, I mean, it's just kind of extraordinary when you see it that way, really. And all these little things of the father losing the job, going to jail, his best friend, becoming a dealer and landing in jail, him getting mugged, right, trying to resist drugs, the brother not being able to get a job for years, them having to work the summer at Pizza Hut for $3 an hour, and kind of how lucky they are. I mean, it builds a picture. The mother being so overwhelmed with joy, that she took a course and becoming like a nursing assistant. I mean, kind of all of this builds a picture and also indicates the level, right? So success for these people is making it to being like a nursing assistant, right? I mean, that's about, as good as it gets. And in the meantime, there's crime and poverty and death, and the gas being cut off. I mean, it does build a cumulatively, it is an extremely damning picture of America.
Yeah. Although I will say that the moment that you pick up on where the mother talks about, and he made it to 18, not everyone makes it to 18 years old, I noted that as well. But I immediately thought that strikes me actually as a moment that, because that's not the only thing she said. She said other things before that in the same shot, and the camera's still rolling, and then she says that, and that struck me as, they've left the silence there, and she feels the need to fill it, and she actually was basically trying to come up with something to say to the camera. And I know what you mean about the thing of it is absolutely true that a lot of kids that kind of underprivileged fall into crime and fall into unfortunate circumstances and don't make it to 18 years old. I totally get that, but I also feel that in that specific moment there was a feeling of, but she is just trying to search for a thing to say, and I felt that was actually kind of unfair to put in the film.
Oh, well, I don't agree. And actually, I might be more agreeable to your point of view had you not seen what you see later, which is, the child kind of, shocked, having been mugged, at gunpoint, again, kind of trying to think through his mind whether actually he was the problem, did he deal with it well? He said, I had to calm myself, right, like, to answer the mugger. You think he feels he escaped with his life, by his fingernails, really. So the mother statement, I might have read that differently had you then not had all the other incidents that kind of are there in the margins of this film,
I get what you mean. I just think in that moment it's not what she says, because what she says is absolutely true, but it's in the way that she says it, to me, says this. I didn't feel that moment was quite justified. It felt like an off moment to me from the perspective of the choice to put that in the film.
Well, you see, to me, I read it differently, and I welcomed it, because what you do see is this love and this joy, and so on, in the midst of what are incredibly low expectations, of life for you and indeed for your child. I mean, imagine kind of a parent who's just glad that their child lives to 18. I mean, you normally get that reaction if your child has a fatal disease, and is expected to live to 12 or something. Then when they make their 18th, you're overjoyed, right? But actually, I think you felt all of that with the mother, and I didn't think that it was just, oh, let's kind of, put the knife in here, or let's make a statement. Because actually, I don't think the mother's mind works that way, No,
I don't think the mother's mind works that way at all. Like I say, I think what she's doing is trying to find another thing to fill the space with. That's what people do with silences. They try and fill them, and I think they've let her do that. And I think it's unjustified on the part of the filmmakers to have included it, because I think it's not quite as. It just felt like an off note to me. I want to ask you, this is a nearly 3-hour film. Were you bored at any point?
No, I wasn't bored at all. I mean, it's a very long film. I must say I did pause it because it's so long, that I needed to make breakfast and I needed to have a bath. Like kind of, the morning was almost over and I hadn't done any of those things. So I did have to pause it for several moments. But actually, I paused it to do things, that I needed to do rather than because I was bored. I mean, I found it like kind of really captivating throughout. There were some things that I thought were just beautiful, really. I don't know if you noticed, but the soundtrack has kind of a jazz sax. Yeah. So you get kind of moments of music, really, and they're both really beautiful and also really sad. Yeah. Kind of, it adds kind of a tinge of melancholy to the whole thing. The other thing that I noticed, that again is unspoken, nobody mentions it in the film, but it's how so many of the men in the film, the black men in the film, clearly suffer from a depression that is never spoken about, right? So William's brother, who also was a great player and who actually went to Marquette University or something, but dropped out or couldn't make it or something, or maybe that was the father. Yeah, it's like these whole families' hopes lie on how the kids do in basketball, but once they fail, you see, like, the way they speak, the way they carry themselves, their fatness, right? You can all see the signs of depression, right? Like, kind of these people now no longer know what to do with their lives, and they're sad, right? Kind of, and actually they tell you there are little things that they say. Before everybody used to be my friend. Now nobody talks to me, or yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
So there are these indications about how their inability to make it in basketball, which means that they now have to continue to live in this ghetto, is like, they can barely get out of bed, really. And so that is like one of the things that is very beautiful about the film, is the way that it shows you all of this without telling you.
There were times as well where I thought about something that you said before, which is about how, I forget which book this was from. It was something that you said about how if you are the minority group in a society, if you're meaning a minority of the power in a society, then you have to be constantly cognizant of how the majority thinks and works and operates, because you are required to negotiate around them and not the other way around. And there's an awful lot of that in this. And what I particularly thought of was, then it led me to the converse, which is that when the privileged white people in this film, who hold all the power and hold the keys to success, when they are faced with the black people who are who are asking them for opportunities and so on, and they say no, or they say, we're kicking you out of school, for instance, for the $1,800 fee. If we take that bit specifically, when the guy, this kind of accountant who works for the school, says it's this $1,800 and you need to pay it, or we can't release the transcript, but I hope we can find out some way of coming to an agreement, so on and so forth. He doesn't say it as viciously as that. The way he says it is sheepish, and he doesn't look at them in the eye, and he and it speaks to real discomfort in him. So what I'm getting at is the converse of the minority having to be aware of the majority, is the majority has to be unaware of the minority to get through the day, because when they are confronted with the way they live, it kills them, and they have to be able to ignore it.
Also, and this is, again, sorry to be relating all of this to current affairs at the moment, but you can't benefit from a system which you not only know is exploitative, but that you are a key mechanism in that exploitation. So, there's also this denial. I mean, that person at the school, the accountant, says, I'm here to help you, but he doesn't look at them, right? And actually, there's such a clear discomfort. The whole scene is beautiful because, the parents are overly grateful, that their son is, finally the transcript is going to be released, and they're obsequious, right? Kind of, they're bowing down to this guy who's embarrassed about the whole situation because he clearly knows how unfair it is, right? And yet he's saying things like, I'm here to help you, where, kind of really they just want the money, right? So, this thing about, it's actually what the thing is from Harold Innis from Empire and Communications, where kind of, people at the center of empire, they don't need to know anything about anybody else because they are the center of empire. Whereas if you're on the margins of empire, if you're in a colonial situation, then actually you have to know your culture, your language, and also you have to know the language of, the master, right? And kind of this is clearly what you see in this film, right? Because, the discomfort of being in another world, that they constantly say, we don't, we don't speak like them. We need to learn how to speak with. And actually, they are being judged. So all these white people, it's like, kind of part of educating them is actually kind of, educating them in their own world, whereas they never feel the need, to kind of learn how to speak like black people or, how black communities work, right? It is always one way, right? And it instantly kind of situates the power relations in those ways. I think all I want to say as a conclusion is that, what the film points out is a whole system, and it's a system of exploitation, where even people's dreams are commodified, right? Kind of, the only way that kind of, people can have something as little, as a dream of a decent life, a university education or just a good education, is by a miracle, really. And actually, they can only receive that miracle, if they are exploitable. It's only if you're completely commodified and if you are of use to somebody, kind of making money, that the miracle happens for you. And that miracle, could be, millions of dollars if you make it as a star, but actually it could just be as basic as getting a good education. So, there's a whole sector of the United States who can only ever dream of getting, a good education through a miracle, and that miracle can only happen, in that kind of capitalism when somebody can exploit what they have been trained to do, at the price of their childhood and their life. So kind of people are gambling with their childhood and their life for something that should be a basic fundamental right for everybody, which is education.
Yeah. And in America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And, I suppose the pursuit of happiness here in the long term means you don't have a life and you don't really have any liberty either.
Though I don't know. I mean, there was a moment when they were in church, and I don't know if it was a phrase of the mother or it was part of a song, about being free, that I also found moving and inspiring, because I think even in slavery, you can find a way of being free. And actually what you see in this film, which is very touching and moving, and one of the things that makes it great, is that in spite of all of this structural oppression, right, and in spite of the things that people do to survive, there is a sense also in which, people are also free. Kind of, I mean, they find kind of comfort through the church or through their communities or through their relations or through acceptance, right? So it's kind of like this struggle of attempting to be free and free to love, certainly, in a system that cages you in, and squeezes you out and sucks you dry.
I think it's an amazing piece of work, and I was absolutely thrilled by it, and I was also thrilled by how beautiful it looked. It's a film that was initially supposed to be made for television, so it was shot on beta tape, and then as kind of time went on, they realised this is a much bigger project, and they ended up shooting it over several years. It made it into this huge film, but it's all shot in this 4:3 aspect ratio TV tape, and it's been restored, and this is the restored version that's on Mubi. And as much as you can restore, analog tape, it looks amazing. It has that real kind of you're standing right there feel to it. It's pretty vibrant, and evocative. Hugely recommended. I think it's just astonishing.
Yes, I do as well. It's on Mubi for the next month. Highly recommended. And don't be daunted by the length. No,
it's excellent. You won't be able to stop watching it.
Yeah.
Unless you have something to do, like make a cup of tea.
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.